to the Globalists. Welcome to the Globalists. Welcome to the Globalists. We're in a new set, a brand new set.
I am a globalist.
And I'm the globalist.
And I'm the globalist who wants to bring jang right into your kitchen.
The moment we wear it, our spirits lift. It helps us grow strong in body and in mind. As we wear it, we learn patience and respect. The belt system motivates students to strive harder and continue growing. This uniform shapes movement into grace and turns performance into something thrilling. Now, embraced around the world, Taekwondo shares our culture, philosophy, and values with pride and spirit. Though it may seem simple, this uniform holds your passion and your journey. It belongs to Taekwondo. Wear the extraordinary. Be with Taekwondo.
A cabinet meeting outside the capital. Underscoring his drive for balanced regional growth, South Korean President Lee Jae-myung convened his weekly cabinet meeting in Sejong City, his first outside Seoul since taking office. We have the wrap-up. Tariff tensions are on the rise. With U.S. auto tariffs on Japan set to fall to 15% starting Tuesday, the big question now: when will South Korea's matching cut take effect? We break down where Seoul's trade talks with Washington stand. And global stock markets, including South Korea's Kospi, have hit fresh highs as investors bet the U.S. Federal Reserve will slash interest rates this week. Good evening, and thank you for joining us on this Tuesday evening. I'm Song Yujin, filling in for Kim Da-mi. Tonight, we begin with President Lee Jae-myung's cabinet meeting held outside Seoul for the first time under his administration. There, the president called balanced regional growth inevitable for sustainable development. The cabinet also confirmed the administration's comprehensive policy roadmap. Our presidential office correspondent Yoon Jung-min starts us off.
Achieving sustainable growth is a key task for the nation, and it is possible through balanced growth. This is according to President Lee Jae-myung as he presided over the weekly cabinet meeting on Tuesday at the Sejong government complex in the administrative city of Sejong for the first time since taking office.
대한민국의 지속적인 성장 발전을 위해서 이제는 국가 균형 발전이 선택이 아니라 이제 운명이 됐다 이렇게 생각이 듭니다.
To shift away from a system heavily concentrated in the capital, the new government is pushing a key national agenda to balance development across other regions, divided into 5 key hubs, including the Seoul metropolitan area, and 3 special governing areas, Gangwon, Jeonbuk, and Jeju.
Currently, we have a balanced growth system that treats regions equally, but it will be converted into concentration and connection, focusing on intensive regional units.
In line with that, the president renewed his pledge to build another presidential office in Sejong, as well as a National Assembly building. And noting Youth Week, President Lee stated the need to boost employment among young people, pointing to the August job report that showed the employment rate of people aged 15 to 29 declining for the 16th straight month.
청년 고용 문제 해결을 위해서는 정부뿐 아니라 기업의 노력도 필요합니다. 청년도 기업도 국가도 모두가 윈윈하는
During Tuesday's meeting, the Lee administration's 123 policy tasks unveiled last month were confirmed by the cabinet, which will serve as a roadmap for the next 5 years. Among a wide range of areas, key agenda items include introducing 2 4-year presidential terms instead of the current single 5-year term. South Korea also aims to bolster its 3-axis defense system, as well as take back wartime operational control from Washington. On the economy, the authorities will focus on fostering new growth engines involving AI and biotechnology. The government made sure these are carried out in the right direction through a monitoring system, while creating an online platform where ordinary people can pitch their ideas. After the cabinet meeting, Lee stopped by a farm in Sejong to meet and greet young farmers and discussed ways to promote smart farming. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
Now, our other top story tonight is on the Trump administration's trade war. Starting Tuesday, Japan will face a 15% auto tariff. This move is raising eyebrows here in South Korea, where talks with Washington to secure the same rate are still underway. With concerns that the country may lose its competitive edge in the industry, Kim Do-yeon has the latest on the negotiations.
A notice on the U.S. Federal Register has made it official. As of Tuesday, U.S. time, the tariff on Japanese-made cars and auto parts will fall to 15%. That's a sharp drop from the 27.5% rate Japanese automakers had been paying, which included a 25% tariff under Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act. The decision immediately reshapes the competitive landscape in the U.S., one of the world's biggest auto markets. With negotiations on a $350 billion investment package ongoing, South Korean auto exports, the #1 export to the U.S., will continue to face a 25% tariff. It leaves South Korean automakers, who are also subject to Section 232 tariffs, at a significant disadvantage, with South Korean and Japanese cars also competing in the same price groups. South Korea's Trade Minister Yo Han-gu is currently in Washington to finalize those talks. Negotiations have reportedly stalled over the terms of the investment deal. Minister Yo says he is focused on getting the lower rate applied as quickly as possible, but not at the expense of South Korea's national interest.
We are working to have the 15% rate applied as quickly as possible. This is a negotiation process, so rather than being swayed by every turn, we are focused on achieving a final result that we can accept.
Meanwhile, Yeo also touched on the recent detention of Korean workers by U.S. immigration authorities at a Hyundai plant in Georgia.
It seems the U.S. side also feels its action was a bit excessive, and we will do our best to ensure the interests of our company are reflected.
The trade minister is expected to stay in Washington for 3 days as he works to finalize a deal on the critical tariff issue. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
Now, meanwhile, with just days left until the U.S. Federal Reserve decides on the country's base interest rate, some major global stock markets, including South Korea's, have reached all-time highs. Park Jun-an has the details and what's ahead for this rally.
On Monday and Tuesday, stock markets in South Korea, the U.S., and Japan broke their all-time record highs just days before the U.S. Federal Reserve's interest rate decision. South Korea's benchmark Kospi climbed to 3,450 points during Tuesday's session, marking its 11th consecutive day of gains and setting a new all-time high for the 5th trading day in a row. In the U.S. on Monday, both the S&P 500 and the Nasdaq set new intraday and closing record highs. The S&P 500 index rose around 0.5% to break 6,615 points at the end of the session. On the same day, the Nasdaq 100 Composite Index surged around 1% to just below 22,350 points at the market's close. Strong performances in the technology and communication services sectors backed the market's rally. In Japan, the Nikkei 225 index broke the 45,000 barrier for the first time on Tuesday, reaching 45,055 points shortly after the market opened. The stock hike was attributed to positive outcomes from U.S. market gains ahead of the anticipated Fed rate cut and progress in U.S.-China trade negotiations. According to the CME Fed Watch tool, which tracks federal funds futures to assess market expectations for Federal Reserve policy shifts, there is a 95% chance of a 25 basis points rate cut at the upcoming FOMC meeting. The tool also indicated a 5% probability of a larger 50 basis points cut. Although a rate cut is widely anticipated, an economics professor noted that stock prices are already high even if the Fed decides to cut the rates.
With expectations of more liquidity and an economic rebound, markets are pricing in a rate cut. Stocks rose, but having already climbed, they could drop after the announcement.
As global markets continue to rally, the Reserve's next move and its narrative could either solidify these gains or bring new uncertainties to the markets. Park Jun-an, Arirang News.
Staying on the economic front, the price of gold has seen its steepest surge since 1979, driven by economic uncertainty and inflation fears linked to the Trump administration's tariff policies. That's according to the Wall Street Journal on Monday, which said gold hasn't rallied this much since the 1970s, when inflation soared worldwide following the Middle East oil shock. The price of gold jumped almost 40% this year, outpacing gains seen during the COVID-19 market crash, as well as the 2007 to 2009 financial crisis. The Wall Street Journal also said both small and large investors are flocking to gold as a hedge against growing uncertainty over the U.S. economic outlook and its role in the global economy. The National Assembly opened its first interpellation session under the Lee Jae-myung administration on Monday. This 4-day questioning period is expected to spark heated exchanges between the rival parties, covering a wide range of state issues. For our politics and diplomacy this week, our Moon Hae-ryun joins me in the studio to tell us more. Welcome, Hae-ryun.
Good evening, Yujin.
Thank you for joining us. So, Hae-ryun, starting off, tell us about this interpellation session and what went down yesterday.
Right, so for those who are unfamiliar, an interpellation session is a formal process in which members of the National Assembly question top government officials, from the Prime Minister to cabinet members and officials, on their policies and performance. This 4-day session started off yesterday, as you just mentioned, and will carry on to Thursday, addressing a range of different issues. So on Monday, lawmakers clashed over political affairs. A debate quickly centered on judicial reforms and calls for Chief Justice Cho Hee-dae to step down, with the Democratic Party accusing him of political bias. This accusation stems from a controversial Supreme Court ruling that found President Lee guilty of making false claims during his 2022 presidential campaign. Now, while the case was sent back to a lower court, the DP claims the decision was a deliberate attempt to interfere with the presidential election and potentially disqualify Lee. So when asked if he agreed with calls for the Chief Justice to resign, Prime Minister Kim Min-seok responded he was well aware of the issue at hand. But People Power Party leader Chang Dong-hyuk argued the move was just to shield Lee, noting his trials were frozen after his election victory. The PPP also criticized plans for a special tribunal on insurrection, tied to former President Yoon Suk-yeol's failed martial law order in December. The debate has now become a central issue in the broader discussion about the separation of powers.
Right, so that was day one, and today was day two. So please tell us about the second day as well.
Right, so today's session zeroed in on foreign affairs, security and defense. And this comes amid ongoing trade negotiations with Washington, as we heard earlier on this newscast with Toyan. And it's therefore no surprise that the trade deal was a big part of the session today, with PPP lawmakers firing questions that targeted the scale of South Korea's pledged investment in the U.S. And here's what one politician said.
The amount South Korea originally agreed to invest in the United States is $350 billion US, 486 trillion won. That's 19.6% of our GDP. Isn't that too much to have agreed to?
To this, the Prime Minister responded that once negotiations are somewhat finalized, Assembly consent may be necessary if it places a financial burden on the public. The issue of South Korean workers detained in Georgia also came under fire, with the PPP arguing that the large-scale arrests targeting only Korean factories by U.S. immigration authorities at a time when tariff negotiations between Seoul and Washington are underway reflect the Lee administration's lack of competence. The DP, on the other hand, countered that the incident stemmed from excessive crackdowns by the U.S. authorities.
The use of chains and ankle shackles during the arrests. This is being condemned as clear mistreatment and an inhumane practice. The U.S., too, must change what needs to be changed and improve what needs to be improved.
So in response to these concerns, Foreign Minister Cho said that this could serve as a blessing in disguise.
The U.S. has now taken the initiative to actively address long-standing visa issues. And since we have also been pressing strongly on this matter, I think it will serve as an opportunity to resolve visa problems more effectively going forward.
So this interpellation session is now halfway through. So Hae-ryung, what can we expect in the days to come?
That's right. So on Wednesday and Thursday, we can expect the National Assembly to focus its attention on the economy, society, culture, and education. So on Wednesday, key topics are expected to include economic management, public finance, government spending priorities, and responses to current economic challenges, including inflation and jobs. Lawmakers will question ministers about measures to stimulate economic growth, fiscal reforms, and industrial policies, as well as scrutinizing the Lee administration's tariff negotiations and any alleged mismanagement. And on Thursday, the agenda is likely to include education policy reforms, school and teacher issues, protection of cultural assets, social welfare expansion, and the administration's broader plans for building national power.
All right, our National Assembly correspondent Moon Hae-ryung, thank you for your report.
Thank you for having me.
Now, staying at the National Assembly, main opposition People Power Party lawmaker Na Kyung-won was blocked from becoming an opposition bloc vice chairperson of the National Assembly Legislation and Judiciary Committee on Tuesday. Amid the ruling party's push, the committee held a secret ballot rejecting her appointment with 10 votes against. The ruling Democratic Party cited Na's ties to former President Yoon Suk-yeol, who is on trial over his martial law declaration, and her own 2019 parliamentary clash trial, where prosecutors are seeking a 2-year sentence. The PPP boycotted the vote, criticizing the chair's decision to hold a secret ballot instead of following the usual practice of filling the post by mutual agreement. Now, for the first time on the defense front, a U.S. aircraft carrier is reportedly not expected to take part in the Freedom Edge multi-domain exercise between South Korea, the United States, and Japan, which began on Monday. According to Yonhap News Agency, citing an unnamed military official, the absence may be due to scheduling conflicts as U.S. carrier strike groups have recently been deployed to the Middle East. But there is also speculation that Washington may be leaving room to resume dialogue with North Korea, which has repeatedly condemned such trilateral drills. This 5-day exercise marks the third of its kind, following previous drills in June and November of last year. Staying on the defense front, what would it be like for you to return to a country you helped secure in war more than 7 decades later? Our defense correspondent Kim Bo-kyung had a chance to talk to these heroes who were invited by South Korea's Veterans Affairs Ministry, honored for their courage and sacrifice.
Most Koreans are familiar with the Incheon landing, the operation commanded by General Douglas MacArthur to reverse the course of Korean War. Celebrating the 75th anniversary of this amphibious landing operation, the Navy held a ceremony on Monday at Incheon City Port. It is not just Koreans who consider the event meaningful, though. U.S.-Korean War veterans who were once stationed here felt the same way, too. Lois R. Quinn, who treated wounded soldiers aboard the hospital ship USS Haven in 1953 as part of the Navy Nurse Corps, was one of them. The 98-year-old was excited to be back in Korea for the first time in 72 years.
It's exciting, and I was trying to find out. I wanted to see where my ship was positioned for 8 months. We were anchored here for 8 months during the war, and then, like I say, after the armistice, they brought the POWs aboard, and we took the POWs back to the States. And we were due to come back the next year, but other things happened. But I have been keeping up with the South Koreans in California.
Rudy B. McKinn Sr., a former U.S. Marine who participated in the Incheon landing and the Battle of Chosun Reservoir, enjoyed the ceremony at the front row. He shared his story of how he got a Korean national flag from a Korean kid at that time, which is still hanging in his office.
And a little kid comes into the bivouac and says, "Is there anything you'd like for me to pick up for you?" He was looking for cigarettes or canned goods or something, anything we could give him. He was starving to death. So I said, yes, I would like a copy of, I would like a Korean flag. And he says, I can get it for you.
The flag drawn on a rice sack was stained with blood from the Battle of Chosun Reservoir. It was framed the wrong way around, but as it's so fragile and weak, he says he just leaves it as it is. With memories of Korean War shared through veterans, our history lives on through the generations. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
Now to the latest on the war between Israel and Hamas. Israel has launched heavy bombardments on Gaza City, leaving dozens dead. The strikes come as both sides remain deadlocked over hostage releases and a possible ceasefire. Park Gun-woo has the latest.
Israeli forces launched a ground assault on Gaza City Monday evening local time, aiming to seize the Hamas stronghold. Al Jazeera reports that at least 48 people were killed and more than 50 were wounded. Israel's defense minister said Gaza is burning in a post on X after heavy overnight strikes on the city. Speaking to reporters on Tuesday, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio also suggested the operation was already underway.
The Israelis have begun to take operations there, so we think we have a very short window of time in which a deal could happen.
While Israeli tanks push toward Gaza City, U.S. President Donald Trump warned Hamas on Truth Social to release Israeli hostages still held in Gaza, calling such an act a human atrocity. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu thanked Trump for what he called his unflinching support for Israel's fight against Hamas and efforts to free all captives. The ground push began just hours after Rubio met Netanyahu in Jerusalem. On Monday, both said the only way to end the conflict is to eliminate Hamas and free the remaining 48 hostages, about 20 of them believed alive, rejecting calls for an interim ceasefire.
We sent a message to the terrorists. You can run, but you can't hide, and we'll get you.
As far as the president's been clear on the ongoing issues in Gaza, and that is that every single hostage, both living and deceased, needs to be home immediately.
Meanwhile, Hamas insists it'll release the captives only in exchange for Palestinian prisoners, a lasting ceasefire, and an Israeli withdrawal from Gaza City. Over the past week, Israeli airstrikes have flattened dozens of high-rises that Israel says were used by Hamas, and last Tuesday hit a building in Doha, Qatar, targeting senior Hamas figures. The Israel Defense Forces has urged more than 1 million residents of Gaza City to move south to designated humanitarian areas, saying some 300,000 have already fled. The coming days are likely to see heavier clashes as Israeli forces advance street by street. Park Go-nu, Arirang News.
Finally, on the cultural front, the original soundtrack for Netflix's animated film, K-Pop Demon Hunters, has reached a milestone by simultaneously dominating both the U.S. Billboard Hot 100 and the Billboard 200 album charts. Golden from the OST of the movie retained its #1 spot on Billboard's Hot 100 singles chart for the 5th week, according to a Billboard preview of its main singles chart on Monday. The soundtrack also topped the Billboard 200 albums chart for the first time this week, marking the first time in about 5 years that a K-pop album and one of its tracks have simultaneously topped both charts. BTS achieved this in December 2020 with the album BE and its lead-off track, Life Goes On.
Rain will begin in the central parts of the country from tonight, and it will rain across the country tomorrow. As much as 80 millimeters of heavy rain will be concentrated in the Seoul metropolitan area, inland areas of Gangwon-do province and Jeju Island. Between tonight and early tomorrow morning, heavy rain of around 20 millimeters per hour will fall in the central regions. After rain across the country on Wednesday, the late summer heat will gradually fade. The temperatures will drop further the second half of the week. The daytime temperature in Seoul on Friday will be 22 degrees Celsius, about 3 degrees lower than the average. Tomorrow morning, Seoul will start off at 23 degrees, Busan at 25 degrees. Daily highs will move up to 26 degrees in Seoul and Chuncheon, Daegu and Jeju 32 degrees. Rain will mostly stop tomorrow night, but Gangwon-do province, the Gyeongsang-do provinces, and Jeju Island will continue to have rain until Thursday. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
And that is Newscenter for tonight. I'm Song Yu-jin in Seoul. For all of us here at Arirang, thanks for watching and hope you join us tomorrow as well. The Korean wave is drawing more fans from all over the world. Local
consumer prices continue to hover at the 2% rate in April.
Turning to robots to allow the visually impaired the chance to better indulge in cultural experiences, like the number of hybrid cars are registered in South Korea has surpassed 2 million using this locally developed Yuri rocket.
아리랑 도시는 세계와 연결되어 문화를 창조했고 새로운 것을 받아들였다.
함께여서 우리는 더 자유롭고 더 멀리 갈 수 있어.
닫힌 문이 아니라 열린 질문으로.
나에게 에이펙은
자유,
융합,
국제성,
다양성, 포용,
개발.
신라의 정신이 에이펙 2025로 이어집니다.
Welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring the most pressing issues across the globe into focus. I'm Kim Mo-kyen. Earlier this month, more than 300 Korean workers were detained at a U.S. battery plant site in Georgia under disputed visa rules before being sent home on a charter flight 8 days later. The incident has sparked anger in Korea, raised questions about America's treatment of foreign specialists, and cast doubt over billions in planned Korean investment in the United States. Washington has expressed regret and promised reforms, but uncertainty still remains. Tonight, we ask, what impact will this crisis have on future projects, and what concrete steps are needed to make sure such a situation never happens again? For answers to this, we are joined in the studio by attorney An Jun-sung. A big welcome.
Thank you.
And also joining us online is Daniel Connolly, Associate Professor of International Relations at Hankuk University of Foreign Studies. Good to see you.
Thank you for inviting me.
So let's start a discussion with Attorney An. So with the general Georgia incident, of course, what basic legal problems do you see in how the detentions have been carried out?
It's a very interesting question because when I conduct some research on issues, and then very interesting issues came up. Actually, first of all, the ICE, that have two options and to conduct arrest and then detention. And first of all, they can use their own discretions. It means that called like civil warrant or the administrative warrant to arrest any illegal alien in the United States. And in that case, they can arrest someone, right, and then illegal alien without any judicial court order or court warrant. However, they're only allowed to arrest, but they cannot conduct a search and seizure on the premises. So, however, if they want to conduct a search and seizure, they have to get the court search warrant, search and arrest warrant, approved by the judge. And the problem is, the difference is that if you want to apply for the court warrant, you need to get to higher legal standard, we call probable cause standard. So it means that the judge have to believe that a certain crime has been committed by a certain person in that situation. So that's a higher standard also. But once they have a court warrant, they can search and seizure premises, and they can do in the further things. But however, if you look at the situation happened on the Georgian case, there was allegedly 475 arrestees, right? So according to the press, there's 4 individuals was the name under the criminal warrant, right? Court warrant, and then the rest 471 was not listed as the target individual. So in the case, it's very interesting because in terms of technical issue, and the criminal warrant allowed ICE to conduct search and seizure on the premises, the Hyundai, the battery, the factories. And then once they get into premises, they can use their own discretion, their authority, to have a further arrest on the West 1st Avenue 1, and technically because they have their authority to do so without court order. So that's very interesting because I think they prepare for a long time, the Georgian authorities, and as they claim on the TV and media, right? They've been prepared a lot, and then they thought about the legal issues, that how can you dance around the legal issues, that they use the criminal warrant to get into the premise, and once they get in there, they use their civil warrant to arrest the rest of them. So that's the very technical issue. Also, in that respect, there's many issues about is there any criminal or constitutional violation in relation to the recent arrest happening in Georgia. But technically speaking, it's very important to note that the criminal the constitutional protection against the criminal abuse or system is most likely applied to the criminal cases. It means that they have to be criminal violation or crime, but but based on the U.S. constitutional cases, U.S. criminal cases and case law, and the court look at this situation as the immigration enforcement as the civil enforcement, not a criminal enforcement, so that the technically speaking, as of today, under the U.S. law, and that any kind of U.S. constitutional protection would not be applied to the detention cases under the immigration cases. So that's a little bit different from what we hear from the Korean media. So.
Right. So this means that in legal terms, there was no violation. Did I get it right?
To apply to the other Miranda rights, for example, should be applied. It have to be the criminal case, means that someone have to be, violate the criminal law, so kill someone or steal something, right? And then you get into criminal trials, criminal procedure to protect himself. So Miranda means that it's prohibition against self-incrimination. So anything I said outside the court can be used against me in the court, right? But in the detention case, for Georgian case, is that it's not about the criminal case. It's about a civil case related to the immigration enforcement issue. So more like a deportation issue. So when you get the final verdict for the deportation case, it's not about guilty or not guilty of a certain crime charge. It's whether that someone will be deported or not, right? So that's how the U.S. court look at the situation at this moment. This is quite different from what we receive from the Korean media.
Right. Thank you for the clarification. Now, from a broader perspective, with more than hundreds of Korean workers detained at this flagship U.S. project, Professor Conley, what message does this send to allies about America's reliability under President Trump's manufacturing agenda?
Well, I think that's the problem, right? President Lee Jae-myung called the raid bewildering, but unfortunately it wasn't. This raid is an example of the new America. This heavy-handed treatment of U.S. allies, human rights violations by ICE of allied citizens. This is becoming the norm these days, and I don't think we can view this raid as like a technical mistake or a misunderstanding. Fundamentally, the U.S. is becoming much more coercive towards foreigners, both domestically and internationally. And this raid is taking part in the backdrop of negotiations over a tariff deal. The U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick said just recently, for Korea, the Koreans either have to accept that tariff deal or pay the tariffs, black and white, pay the tariffs or accept the deal. And I think South Korea and many other American allies are slowly really realizing that these perceptions of a special relationship with the United States is not shared by U.S. counterparts. And in today's era, when America says America first, they literally mean America first. And the reliability of America, I think, is quite rightfully called into question.
Right. So it seems the situation is making allies question the importance and the significance of the relationship. Now, let's also touch upon the legal side again. So some workers say that they actually signed voluntary departure papers under pressure, not fully understanding it. Attorney, how could those signatures be challenged later if they were not, truly voluntary?
I guess before we answer the question, I guess if someone like to challenge whatever the right, whatever they sign agreement in the past, I guess that's the case. In this case, immigration case, the civil case means that someone who signed a contract under the pressure and bring action against U.S. government, I guess, we are saying for the U.S. government. And so, however, that if anyone to make argument, challenging the legal system, and you have to get proof you have a standing. You know what I mean? The constitutional requirement for the U.S., United States, you have to get, am I allowed to bring that kind of suit? So it's a little technical things that if you're illegal alien, undocumented alien, right? Can they have a legal right, constitutional right to make the same constitutional right like the United States, U.S. citizens, right? That's a little bit technical issue, and I'm sure there's kind of a debatable on depends on which side you are. But however, the problem is that look at this one. I just what the Professor Kunali said. I think I totally agree with the professor because I'm looking at new America, new norm with the new America. Also, I don't think there's a mistake. It's carefully coordinated attack or raid, right, on the industry. I don't think it's, but my concern is that it won't be the last one. There could be the second one happen, maybe tomorrow. I won't be surprised something happen. And even the same day on the raid on the Hyundai battery factory, there's several raids in the different states, Washington D.C. and Chicago, and several cities at the same time. And it's not like the. I think this question, we have to look at the legally different perspective, perhaps new law with the new America. Because you think that U.S. will protect your civil right, your human right, you have to think again, because now U.S. changed, actually. And then even that, I looked it up, I was very surprised to find that last Monday, last Monday on September 8, 2025, there's a new U.S. Constitutional Court case, which is a landmark case, basically reversing, U.S. history against racial profiling. Basically, what the court said that the ICE agent, right, when they were without even criminal warrant, they can stop any person based on their gender or nationality or even language. They can stop person and ask them whether you're illegal alien or not. So that's the constitutional case now. So I guess I was very surprised because when I was in law school, we were talking about racial profiling is bad, really the last thing happening. But now the U.S. Constitutional Court reversed it after 20, maybe 30 years after the case. So that means that even after Trump is gone, the U.S. Supreme Court case will be stayed for a long time, actually. So that's really concerning that it's not only the Trump himself, it's not only the White House or administration or ICE, even the judicial branch changed their position on that, gender issue or racial issue and a lot of social issues, including immigration issues. That's very concerning. So I guess that voluntary signing paper, one thing, or it's more like the person will try to make an argument. But But however, if you want to make argument, you have to base on certain other legal basis. Solely based on the immigration case, I don't think the person have a standing to bring action. So in most cases, in the immigration case, they have related a crime or related something else, something that based on a certain separate crime, or they make argument during their process, in criminal procedure, but some certain person, illegal immigrant, had violated their constitutional right. But by itself, the immigration enforcement itself is the U.S. court looked at it as a civil matter. Purely civil matter, which means that there's a lot of restriction will not be applied that the many immigration cases.
Mm-hmm. So it will depend on your status in your stay. Then, when under detention, these kinds of workers actually reported that overcrowding and poor facilities, and they also had no contact with family or their lawyers as well. How serious are these situations when judged against U.S. law and international human rights standards?
It's a very interesting question. I looked it up. I was amazed. First of all, when you see the immigration law, right, some certain kind of law, legal field that consider as purely sovereign issue, sovereignty issue, means that the other states normally do not talk about the immigration cases. Because that if some country complain about some other country's immigration law, and they can do that whatever do, it's basically, whatever you want to do, you do it, right? You don't really making immigration stuff talking to other country because of their own discretion. And so by nature, immigration law is it's more like considered as more like an independent, sovereignty issue under by one state, by another. And second is that in some of the international human rights violation issues that I actually looked it up, actually, in most cases, and the United Nations has like, the UN standard minimum rule for the treatment of the prisoners, right, specific, also called like Nelson Mandela rules, right, based, famous. But however, then what happened was that it's applied to prisoners. So it means that there's criminal violation happened. But in U.S. court looked as the civil violation, not criminal violation by itself, right? It could be something related crime happened in the meantime, but by itself, as they look at it as the criminal, not criminal, it's a civil matter. So that's very concerning because the Supreme Court, U.S. Supreme Court looking at it as a purely civil matter. So the case that there's a lot of things, implication on legal implication on that issues in the future.
So now let's also touch upon how policy fixes would follow up. So beyond clarifying B1 business visitor visas for short stays for meetings, Professor Connolly, is there a realistic path to creating a new visa under the H-1B specialty worker visas for longer stays for skilled jobs so that technical teams can actually legally remain in the U.S. for months of training?
Right, and I think in theory it can be done. The U.S. has these agreements with other countries, Canada, Mexico, Chile, Singapore, Australia. And currently, I think South Korea can make this argument through working groups with the United States. And there is even legislation that's currently been proposed, the Partner with Korea Act, that would create an allotment of 15,000 E-4 visas for highly skilled Korean workers. So I think theoretically this could be done, but fundamentally is the problem of domestic U.S. politics. And just like Attorney Ann talked about the problem of legal precedents, I think another problem right now is in American domestic politics. You have very strong stakeholders with very strong anti-immigration agendas that are becoming powerful forces in U.S. politics. And even this Partner with Korea legislation, it's been introduced since around 2013, and it never gets anywhere. So with the anti-immigration agenda so strong today, I think it's even less likely to succeed. And let's remember Trump's One Big Beautiful Act. It basically created $170 billion of funding over 4 years for border control and kind of immigration deportation. So think about in the United States, there's this gigantic deportation industry being created in addition to the legal precedents that we just talked about that makes changing course very difficult at the political policymaking level.
So these facts are very important because, we are going to expect more trade investments, more business investments to the U.S. from South Korea from the latest trade deal, of course. So how might this unresolved visa issues actually affect future projects, trade talks, and supply chains as well?
Well, absolutely. And I think it operates on two levels. The first is like a chilling effect on Korean companies that are considering investments, and especially the smaller subcontractors that might not have the political clout or the financial ability to get the very rare, 2,000 Koreans get the B1 visas a year, or the business visas a year. So this means that smaller subcontractors are less likely to be willing to do this. And the second level it would operate is companies already active in the United States. By needing to be fully in compliance with the current U.S. visa regime, it's going to cause costs and slow down work. And during the Biden administration, the Americans knew that the Koreans were maybe gaming the visa system quite a bit, but they didn't enforce it. But the Trump administration is now enforcing it. And if Korean companies want to follow the law, and in America today, the law is a very shifty object, it's going to mean they have to do things by the book, which will mean slower and less progress on a lot of these investments.
Right, so it could actually ripple far beyond Georgia into trade talks and future supply chains as well. Now, since this B1 visa rules are still quite unclear and open to different interpretations, Attorney An, what kind of legal guidance or some kind of a clarification do you think should Washington issue so that Korean engineers know exactly what activities are permitted when they actually travel there?
Yes, it's interesting because it might be a political question. It depends, right? And then, as the Professor Connery mentioned, that it's more like U.S. domestic politics changing, and they are become more and more anti-immigration, right? So things that's I'm very concerned that even if the Korean government or Korean companies, conglomerate, complain to the U.S. government, let's give us more visa, H-1 visa, and type or create new visa types, so for us to do work to finish our work, and unfortunately, I don't think it's going to happen. It's very difficult to things happen in that way because there's very strong movement against immigration, and things like they want money. So more like a Buy America, right? Buy America, hire America. Basically, they don't want the foreigners working in U.S., right? They want to invest money in U.S. and they want to hire U.S. citizens, right? I think that's the really things behind the story. And then the visa. So I guess really we have to find out what Trump really wants for this situation. Does he really want the things done as he promised or as planned, or does he only want to show up that we have this huge amount of investment promise made by Korea, Japan, many countries. That's why I make this country greater again. Or he really want things done as he planned. That's two different stories. So I guess we wait to see what happened in the following months, because that I'm sure the White House will take some action. And that depends on what kind of action they're taking. I guess we can see how serious they are. They want to try to keep their promise on their side in the United States. So if they want to do it, or they just want to get money and hire some Americans, right? So, and plus, if I want to comment, it's very interesting. I looked it up, the IC's official press release. I was very surprised to find that, the name of the project name, their raid on Hyundai factory, how they call it. Officially, they call it the Operation Low Battery. I was shocked to read that official name, how serious they are. They want to kill the company because there's a low battery. It's a battery company, and they officially call low battery. I think that's really explain everything, that how they looking at the situation here. And we have to think very carefully what they're doing right now, because they are changed. They are new America with new law. So we have to look at it from an angle. I think that's, that's like the comment.
For a clearer view of the situation, we would need to look into what President Trump actually ultimately wants, his goal. Now, so in relation to this, so if we look ahead after this crisis, then Professor Conley, what kind of joint measures do you think should Washington and also Seoul put in place to prevent a repeat of this situation, so that Korean workers and companies can feel a little bit of security going forward?
Well, I think the solving the problem is straightforward if, as Attorney Han said, both sides want to solve it. I think for the Koreans, for over 10 years now, they've been saying we need more visas, we need a larger quota. If the U.S. policymakers think that this Make American Industry Great Again requires more Korean visas, the Trump administration could definitely get that done. We've seen them circumvent Congress a lot already. There are ways the administration could fudge some sort of agreement to facilitate it. And I think right now there's momentum to make a joint working group on this between U.S. and Korean authorities. And maybe from the Korean perspective, adding this to the current negotiations over the tariff deal could be a strategic way to maybe try to get some confirmation of the visa rules. But again, this is assuming that the U.S. is really seeking a win-win trading relationship with South Korea. if Trump's America First policy is really just a predatory approach towards its allies, then maybe the long-term strategy for South Korean businesses is de-risking some of their investments in the United States and maybe diversifying into other markets could be maybe give them more leverage in the long term over the United States than right now, where a lot of these Korean companies are very dependent on the U.S. market.
Right, so we'll really have to see what Washington's next moves would be, what measures they would announce in the coming months, and many allies would definitely will pay close attention to that. But as for now, we'll have to conclude our discussion right here. Thank you so much for your time and for your insights tonight, Attorney An.
Okay, thank you.
And Professor Connolly, we appreciate it.
Thank you.
And that'll be all from us on Within the Frame. Be sure to tune in again next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Till then, stay informed and engaged.